Hello, what's up, everybody? Today we will be discussing the current state of and opportunity space for traditional game developers around Web3. And specifically, what we're going to be talking about is first of all, what does Web3 even mean anyway? Secondly, what are the kinds of opportunities that traditional game developers should be engaging in or thinking about? Third, what is the current investment environments and thoughts around valuation? What companies should we be aware of in terms of great emulation targets or companies we should look at in terms of Web3? And then finally, future trends and predictions. And we'll see where this conversation goes. Just to give some folks some context, we kind of met during GDC, and there was some interesting discussions around Web3 and how game developers should be thinking about it. And I thought that that line of discussion was super interesting. So wanted to invite these folks to talk about it in more depth. And these folks include first, Jeremy Horn, VP of Innovation at FunPlus. Clearly, since you're in charge of innovation, I'm sure Web3 might be part of the universe of things that you're looking at. Chris Ye, CEO at Ukin Games, and Nico Vori, founder and CEO at Blockstars. And so I thought we could kind of jump in terms of like first talking about, Jeremy and Chris. Maybe you could tell us a little bit more about your companies and what you're doing, but how you guys are thinking about Web3, if at all. And then Nico, it'd be great since you're kind of actually doing stuff at Blockstars in terms of Web3. Maybe you could tell us a little bit more about specifically what you're working on, but maybe starting with you, Jeremy.
Yeah, happy to talk about it. I think for context, right before joining FunPlus, I was the vice president of business and strategy at Gem City, where I worked on Champions Ascension. And that kind of led me down the rabbit hole of crypto gaming. It was, learning trial by fire, as on all fronts, from regulatory perspective, the technology perspective, the chains, the gaming. What does it mean? And I really fell in love with it after close to 10 years in free to play. So joined FunPlus. And my role is kind of to track the evolution of the market, not just Web3, but across all genres and platform. But 90% of the discussions I have right now with fellows in the industry is all about what is Web3 and how does that impact our business. How should a company like FunPlus consider Web3 and its implications? So, really exciting time for us.
So it sounds like you're the right person to have on this podcast as well, Jeremy.
Hopefully.
Yeah, my name is Chris. It's nice to chat with everybody, and it's great to see everybody at GDC as well. I run a company called Ukin Games. We make free-to-play mobile games. We've been around for about 12 years, mostly casual games like solitaire and stuff. And the interest in Web3 actually started at the beginning of last year for me on the investment side. Started playing around personally, buying some assets with some friends, who some of which have dived really deep into the space, starting companies off of that and otherwise. And so got to see just a really interesting set of activity that was happening tangential to games at the time because it's just digital art and people buying things. But clearly, as you extrapolate from that activity that we are seeing happening in abundance, it's moving more and more towards a game. Varying approaches that companies have taken all kind of end up around monetizing or building worlds that are metaverses, like that look a lot like games. But I do think that from a timing perspective, we're earlier, and which is why you've seen activity in other areas. We have seen some full games as well that have launched here, but not I don't think that's the end iteration of those. So and at Ukin, we're just exploring the space and trying to understand what's going to happen moving forward. We love innovation and trying to be innovative and keeping up with that. So
Okay, Nico.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks for having us. Really looking forward to this discussion. I'm Nico, founder and CEO of Blockstars. We are actually building a game on blockchain right now. It's on the Solana blockchain, and it's a management simulation game with a music theme. My journey into Web3 is, I think, similar to the rest of the folks on this panel, but I got my start in games very early at Zynga, pre-Facebook Canvas. So we actually had Mafia Wars. I worked on Mafia Wars on MySpace, then Farmville on Facebook, Frontierville, Poker, then transitioned into the free-to-play mobile space, where there's a lot of parallels, I think, that we're going to talk about today, about user adoption of this new kind of freemium model, free-to-play model. Made mobile games, had to adapt game design techniques for this new form factor. Made voice games as well for both voice devices, home devices, Google and Amazon, and then also for mobile in the car. We actually made games for car drivers and commuters. And so the through line for us as a team, many of us are ex-Zynga, worked together for years on these various companies. The through line for us is we just love new technologies. And whenever we see a new technology emerge or a new platform emerge, user behaviors also will change, and they offer new economic models, new gameplay models, new design challenges. And it's just really fascinating for us to kind of go into that space. So Web3 is kind of this journey for us that's been throughout these different kind of technology evolutions or revolutions, bringing us to this point. And again, this is not the end point. I think we all agree, we're so early in this space. There are going to be a lot of innovations. Some things aren't going to work, others are. But yeah, we're just really fascinated by the journey that consumers often take into these kind of new spaces. So yeah, Web3 is definitely a new frontier for gaming, for sure.
Right. And so, Jeremy, you had mentioned that at FunPlus, one of the things that you're working on is determining what Web3 actually means. So maybe you could tell us for you guys, what does Web3 mean? And then Chris and Nico, if you guys could weigh in on whether you agree or hopefully disagree.
Yeah, hopefully disagree. My takes are very conservative, and I want to be transparent. I'm not a red pill person who sees it as this incredible transformation that would change everything. No, I think Web3 is a tool that allows for ownership of digital assets. Often, the criticism is, well, we could do this previously in World of Warcraft via, trading marketplaces, etc. And while it's true, it was not a good system. It was, full of frauds and cheats and bugs, and you could not have trust in what you were acquiring. But also, it was not scalable, right? A small developer could never have built a World of Warcraft type of marketplace in any meaningful way. The example was, I think, NetEase had a similar marketplace, but there were literally hundreds of people that had to verify the legitimacy of the assets that were on their platform in order to trade them. So not scalable at all. So really, to me, Web3 is remove the metaverse buzzwords and all of those things. It's just a tool that's going to enhance the games that we develop. I do not believe it's going to be this brand new vertical of gaming. No, it's going to be great games with this added layer of ownership.
Chris, is that how you guys are thinking about that as well, or is it different?
I think it's generally similar. I really see Web3 as a new primitive. I think where there's a lot of changes is in the business model. So we're free to play, I guess, was also a big change in business model and a shift, but it's slightly different in nature. Here, it's the primitive that you're adding is incentivization. So Jeremy talked about ownership. I think ownership is at the core of this. You can't, in my mind, you can't really have Web3 without the financialization of things and the trading of things. And so that's what we're bringing to bear. And what that does is it starts to have these effects on the business model. You're no longer selling primary one, where the creators are selling all the goods and they control all of the supply. Once the supply is out there, it floats and it trades, and that's how you really give people the sense of ownership. If you don't have that, and there are a lot of sort of Web3 plays that are, they call themselves Web3 plays, but they don't have that aspect. I think that you're not grasping that piece, which is perfectly fine. Free to play exists and other business models exist, but that's sort of where the innovation comes in. So I would agree on that part, and I try to elaborate, on this new primitive, and I think it'll lead to really interesting dynamics. I mean, incentives drive everything, really.
Yeah, and maybe to your point on incentives, Chris, I think the one aspect of Web3, and to your point, Jeremy, when you said that, some people ask, well, what can you do with Web3 that you couldn't do before? But it seems like maybe the economic model or the incentives in terms of also having access to a crypto-rich community, right? So a community of people who can buy stuff, as well as the economic model around potentially having initial token sales to fund further development or things like that. But I don't know if you guys would agree that I mean, maybe that's not the technical definition of Web3, but maybe to the point about incentives and how is it different from, traditional other thing. What can you do with Web3 that you can't do with other technologies? I don't know if you guys would agree or disagree with whether that's also a difference as well. But
Yeah, I think, Joseph, you made some really good points there. I think one of the things I'd push back a little bit on is
okay,
that, you described how people are doing, economic models, token sales to fund things. I think that's just a tactic, right? And those are going to
yeah,
evolve over
okay,
time. I don't see those as fundamental to Web3 in any way, shape, or form. It's
okay,
literally just a funding model. It's a crowdfunder. It's a Kickstarter. Is essentially what it is.
true, yeah, yeah,
So that's not something I think personally is actually that
right,
critical. I do think it goes back to the digital ownership piece, which I think is really important. And for us, we're seeing that, in real life. We have a very active Discord community. We're constantly, we're building the game. We're co-developing it with the community. And I know that's not new either. That's not like necessarily a Web3 thing. But because of that layer of ownership, because there's that kind of connection with the digital assets, the community is much more involved in a way that I have never seen in my career as a game developer. And it's actually really wonderful to see because it kind of creates that really strong bond between the game dev and the end consumer, right? The end customer. And they really are customers because they've all, yes, to your point, Joseph, they've bought in and we did a token sale as well. But that's not the be all and end all. And in fact, we didn't really need to do that because we had funding that would allow us to do that. But we chose to do it because the connection with the community becomes so strong and it really allows you to kind of co-develop the roadmap. So for me, the most exciting thing is that digital ownership piece. And then two is the economic model. The reason we did a management sim and we chose to build a management simulation game, which is essentially a giant spreadsheet under the hood, is because
yeah,
we think that the game economy becomes so much more interesting when you've got a token involved. Whether or not you're trying to do play to earn or play and earn or play and win and earn, there's lots of different things floating around right now. We're definitely not play to earn. We're trying to make a fun game first and foremost. But I think those are the interesting pieces to me is that kind of connection through ownership between the game dev and the player, and then the opportunity to make much more interesting economic models and game economy designs compared to the past, because there's more at stake, right? It's not just a free to play, like here's your coins, like it's completely worthless and meaningless. Even if
right,
it's not worth very much, it creates an interesting incentive. And I think that's really powerful.
To expand on that, and I agree with everything that Nico said, from a developer's perspective, there's just an additional incentive is that you're going to get a royalty in perpetuity of all sales, right? In the free-to-play model, when I sell a character, and I've worked on multiple character gacha type of games, you sell it, it's a time-limited event, it's gone. You will never see $1 out of that character again, and it's a content treadmill, nonstop. And here you've got a system that I think I wish we could see that in the entire world, especially for artists. When I've got a character that I sell you, forever, whenever that character is sold again, I get a portion, 5%, 10%, whatever I decide. And that creates sustainable businesses, right? If I were to tell a friend who's like a painter, hey, every time your painting gets resold, you're going to get a portion of the sales. That would change the livelihood of so many people. And I think that's what is so powerful, is that it creates incentives for the buyers, the sellers, the owners. It creates a much more, I would say, viable and sustainable business for everyone, which that I really, really appreciate.
yeah. And a friend of mine who is working in kind of crypto Web3 had once described, I think, this aspect of what you guys are talking about as kind of like the stock market for millennials and for like folks in emerging countries who may not be able to buy a house, but they are able to buy something in whether it's a game or within this more digital economy. And so kind of like, I thought that was kind of an interesting way to think about it in terms of like, as older folks in the West may be thinking about stock market and how do you invest your money into something that's how some people may be viewing crypto and Web3 as well.
That I'm fairly negative on. And the reason is that
okay.
we've seen with the ICO wave, right?
Okay.
How many coins panned out of like the thousands and thousands and we saw. And we heard the same type of feedback. And even then I was like, I don't believe in this, right?
Right.
It's because there's no
greater
utility.
fool theory type stuff.
Okay.
Right. So the aspect of like, oh, this is going to allow like people to invest. I think some people can invest like, portions of a Bitcoin or some cryptocurrency, but that at this point, it's speculation, just like if you were to buy a stock, regardless of your location. But I agree that it allows, some people, especially in Southeast Asia or in some countries that have limited access to American stock, to invest their money.
Right.
But the idea that it's like the next way for people to invest in like digital goods, I'm like, very few of those games are going to work. And we see it right now. Like most of the coins that have been listed by games are on their way down. Like I'm not sure
Well,
that's like
I mean, and here's why. Everybody who's designed a game knows that an in-game token or in-game economy is by definition inherently inflationary, right? And so there literally is no possible way to control your inflation if you are designing your currency to be inflationary, right? Now, the question is then just managing that inflation. How bad is it? And we've seen, and again, I hate to pick on Axie, but Axie Infinity, of course, is the big, 1,000-pound gorilla in the room. Like, they've got a 10-to-1 like inflation rate at the moment, and they're constantly trying to fight it. And they're, to their credit, they're doing a decent job of kind of keeping on top of that. But it's a never ending battle, right? You talk about content treadmill. Well, economy treadmill is going to be the problem, I think, for a lot of blockchain/Web3 games.
Right. And I wanted to kind of follow up on 2 points that you made, Nico, in terms of like how you guys are specifically integrating blockchain Web3 into your game. But when you think about the broader context of other game developers, could you guys talk about like the specific ways in which you would use this technology into a game, whether it's selling NFTs or whether it's selling land or different types of approaches? And maybe Chris, like as you're looking at this space, what are there any specific capabilities or things that you're thinking about that excite you? Like, hey, we could do this in this game or something like that.
Nico, did you want to go first, or I can?
Sure. I mean, I could talk about the specifics of what we're doing, and then I'd love to hear, Chris, what you guys are looking at. So I mean, our block stars are essentially musicians. We did a collection of 10,000. There are NFTs, and our take on them is that they're the characters in the game. You play with them, you upgrade them, and that's so. Typically, NFTs are thought of as immutable, and ours are to a degree. Cosmetically, they are, and they're kind of what they were minted with doesn't change. But they also have skills that we store on the gameplay server that are just separate from the blockchain, and we're upgrading the block stars as you're practicing and busking and gigging and releasing singles and forming bands and playing the management simulation game. And so our take on how we are incorporating Web3 technologies and blockchain in particular is to take the kind of notion of immutability and ownership, digital ownership, which still is there. Like you own your NFT, you can do with it whatever you want, sell it, keep it, burn it. It's up to you. But we're then layering in this kind of gameplay piece, which is allowing you to improve your NFT, which we think is quite neat. And so you form this connection. I could easily see somebody doing like a Tamagotchi style game where like you're keeping your digital pet alive and it's growing with you. And there's a few of those projects happening. But that's our take on it, which is like, again, it's kind of piggybacking off this notion that I mentioned earlier, which is there's this really strong connection through digital ownership with your in-game assets. And people are, giving their block stars names, and they're giving them, literally giving them Twitter accounts and TikTok accounts. And they're all of our block stars are 3D models, fully rigged and animatable. And we give you the FBX file as part of the NFT sale. And so we've got a whole bunch of, artists and animators out there who are creating these incredible music videos, and they're having them dancing on their kitchen tables. And that's the kind of thing that you don't really see, and you can't really do even in kind of free-to-play or more traditional gaming. Like the character is whatever the game developer says it is, and it just exists in the game. With us, people are giving life to the block stars outside of the game environment. And that's really, really interesting to us. And that's kind of a, like we weren't necessarily even expecting that. We were kind of hoping it would happen, but we didn't expect it. And it's that kind of nascent behavior that you're like, you see something of, there's a grain of something there, and you're just like, I just want to kind of pick at that and see where that thread takes me. But that's the way we've incorporated blockchain. It's really, really digging into that digital ownership, really digging into that kind of like, hey, I want to form a connection. I want to improve this block star. It is a management sim, so that the game design is intended to be played over years, not months. And so it's meant to be something that you really form a deep bond with. So let's see how it goes. So far, so good. And again, we're seeing that kind of community behavior is very much in line with what we hoped we would see at this point. But Chris, I'd love to hear like how you guys are thinking about it.
Yeah, that's super cool, Nico. What you said, I think it aligns a lot with what you said about community, which I really agree with is very different in this case. And I think the community forms as a result of the incentive and the desire. It's not everything is driven by incentives, but it kind of starts the flywheel on that. what I've observed is I actually think the playbook to generating revenue and building a business here is now a lot more straightforward because we've seen certain pillars of success. And I would temper that with where we are in the industry or in the development of this industry, which is still very, very early. So there's still a lot of unknowns, but the things that we know are people want to buy land. There's a market for land. It exists now. And no, it needs to be legitimized by the project itself and by the people behind the project. But people want to buy land. People are willing to buy assets. So, PFPs or like profile picture assets and collections and things like that. People want to buy. Everyone needs a token. Everyone needs a marketplace. And I think if you kind of start with that, there's a meta thing that's happening right now, and you can argue, game developers, look at it as an industry as like, well, this is an opportunity for us to raise money because people see a lot of potential in this future, and the structure of the industry is going to shift as a result of these changes. Because what happens is if the dream is like Ready Player One, as just an example, and I know people reference that movie as an example, it's like compatibility is starting to be worked out. So I do think that in the future, you will see assets move between games, and we haven't seen that at all yet. And that's why it really kind of doesn't really make any sense. But that is where we're going, and that's sort of what's exciting about it. And so the structure of game development starts to shift. We already see that in free-to-play in some senses where, game developers kind of copy each other. When someone learns something and a technique or whatever, then the smartest game developers will learn about that technique and will try to implement it. And you see a lot of games that look very, very similar, but we haven't seen the layer of transportability between things. And I think that will form. It will form with the largest influencers of the space. And I think there are certain parties that are just taking it at the right pace. Like the problem with Axie, and again, not to pick on them, but they dove right in. And I think they're in a really good position because they built up a capital base where they can kind of build, but they've also jumped in and created a variety of problems for themselves, which is where the challenge lies, in that you have to set your tokenomics and you have to be, it's the double-sided edge of the community aspect, which is they want to know what's going on. They're demanding updates. They want a roadmap that's clear, but game develop is never clear. How many times when we launch a game is that the final product? That's not at all. It's actually in free to play. That's the beginning of your journey, and you're iterating, and that sort of runs in contrast to this. But I think what's interesting is that the community is going to form differently, and these standards will form, and that'll create the structure of the community as a result are going to be different.
Chris and Nico, I think this reminds me of the Kickstarter wave, right? Where we saw a ton of products that were heavily invested, and a lot of those products did not work. And what happened is that today it's much harder to raise capital on Kickstarter than it was when Kickstarter launched, right? And I'm always wondering when is going to be that tipping point for crypto, right? Because right now there's craze, but like every craze and every hype, it tends to fall down, right? And yes, right now you're able to raise capital, to sell items early, but I am really worried that as most of those bets do not pan out and as consumers are left with the bags, we're going to see that trend decrease. And that's why I'm always like separating crypto as a tool that is going to engage people more meaningfully. Fortnite, if I could own my skin and do whatever I want with them, that would make the game so much more fun to me. That's why I separated from the craze that we see on like early capital raising, NFT drops, land sales. I'm like, those bets are not proven. And I think once more and more fail, that money is going to dry out. Just like people don't always like to pre-order a game because maybe the game is going to suck. And then it's like the classic segue, and I know, Joseph, was one of your questions, is like the hack that happened on Ronin this week. This is another case of, well, what does it mean for consumer trust, right? Because some people got burnt, and Axie is doing the right thing. They're raising capital in order to reimburse players affected, but this is not going to be like a one-off case. And Axie is in a unique position where they can raise more capital and reimburse people, right? Mom and pop shops, small 30-people team in San Francisco or Montreal, they're not going to be able to like reimburse 200 million hack. And I'm really worried when I see, this like hyper excitement that maybe is not going to translate into like long-term sustainable business.
Right. And Jeremy, to your point, maybe we could talk about that and we can circle back on the community question a little bit later. But given that hack of Axie Infinity, and they had to do a big capital raise in order to make some of their players whole. But certainly not every company is going to be able to do that. That doesn't have the scale and the brand and kind of like the position that Sky Mavis has. So, in terms of like as a game developer, when you think about some of the risks out there, what should traditional game developers be aware of in terms of the risks, whether it's the risk of the specific chain that you're using or hacks or things like that? And maybe we can start with you, Nico, since you're in the weeds on this. What are you worried about?
Oh man, it's the Wild West, right? And so
Yeah,
it's like building on quicksand, and that's part of what we love, right? As a team, that's kind of our DNA, and that's we like to be early, and we like the opportunities that it presents. But that's the challenge also is that you're building on quicksand. We've chosen Solana. They're a great layer one solution, but because they're great, they're also attracting a lot of developer excitement and interest, and constantly growing their number of projects, and that means that there's a lot of network congestion. So as a game developer, if you're relying on-chain activity, right? I mean, you need to actually, interact with the Solana blockchain, and you've got network congestion, and the transaction fails. Well, your entire game is unplayable, right? And Ethereum has their own problems, of course. That's why you've got this whole proliferation of layer twos, with the gas fees and what have you. So everyone's trying to solve these problems in different ways, and nobody's really got a perfect solution just yet. So yeah, as a game developer, what I worry about is what I've always worried about as a game developer, which is platform risk and platform over reliance. With Zynga, it was so much reliance on Facebook, and as long as the relationship was good, times were great. But then once Facebook inevitably started to kind of squeeze a little tighter and say, hey, maybe you can't use the request channel and the feed channel quite so aggressively for your Farmville requests, that started to kind of impact the business, and kind of slowed the growth down quite drastically. Mobile is the same thing. Like, you're kind of at the mercy of the app stores, right, and their rules and regulations and their 30% tax, and so there's always that platform risk, and it's exactly the same. Even though we talk about decentralization, and that's like the big buzzword, one of the big buzzwords for blockchain, like, you are still entirely reliant on the technology platform, at least, that you're building on, and if that's shifting from underneath you, or doesn't offer a perfect game, because they're not designed for games, right? Like, blockchain was not built so that you can make great games, right? So that's the biggest thing for me, is just like it, and it's like flashback from every single gaming company I've started and been a part of, all the way back to Zynga, which is like, oh my God, you are so reliant on the platform for your success, and
right.
if the platform plays nice with you, you're going to do great. But if the platform shifts, you might have some trouble. So that's the number one thing that keeps me up at night, for sure.
And Nika, is it too sensitive for me to ask you about the other, what else did you consider besides Solana? And then why did you guys choose Solana versus something else?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And we get asked that all the time. So we did a
Okay.
pretty extensive deep dive last summer and into the early fall, looking at different solutions. And at that point, Solana hadn't really, like, they existed, but they didn't really talk about gaming. And we looked at them and didn't, they seemed to be more about DeFi at that time. So we were like, okay, we're not going to look at them. And so we looked at all the layer twos, Fortes and Polygons and, Gala Games and what have yous, all building on Ethereum. And we had a short list of them. But then Solana popped up kind of out of nowhere, or re-emerged, and had made a big push for gaming as one of the primary use cases. And we had a great relationship with them. We still have a great relationship with them, and they have a games team. And Anatoly is on the record as saying that he believes games is the the on ramp for the mass market to adopt blockchain, because you just want to play a fun game and you don't care what's under the hood. You don't care it's blockchain or Solana or whatever powering it. And it happens to resonate very strongly with me. Like, that's our thesis as well. Like, new technology platforms equals great opportunities for gaming and entertainment. And so we ended up just deciding, like, hey, this is great. They're less decentralized. So if you're like a Bitcoin maxi or ETH maxi, like, you look at Solana and you say, hey, it's like a venture backed company, right? But we're not. We just want to make great games. We're not ETH maxis or Bitcoin maxis or decentralization maxis. We just want to make fun games that are hopefully performant, and that can scale with the platform. So that's how we landed on Solana in the end. It was a combination of tech, their focus on gaming, and then kind of just personal relationships and strong support.
Got it. And Chris or Jeremy, when you guys, when you look at the Web3 opportunity and when you think about some of the risks, and Jeremy, you're the one who brought up the Axie hack. What are you guys most worried about from your perspective?
Yeah, I think Nico talked about being reliant on platforms. Overall, I think users trust the Apple App Store, right? It's like you're not gonna get hacked when you buy something. It's a clear transaction, and you've got direct recourse if a problem happens. I contact Apple, I say, hey, I bought this pack it was a mistake, and us developers, we give the money back pretty much through Apple. Yeah, it's the Wild West. You hear a lot about like this is an added level of security. Blockchain can't be compromised. Well, the problem is that there's no one blockchain. There's so many, and the market is so fragmented. Avalanche, Solana, Polygon, Wax, and we all agree here, I'm pretty sure, the future is going to be multi-chain, right? But just like we talk about interoperability, it's not a one-to-one correlation between one chain to another. Like bridging, it's not as easy as it sounds. And the moment you have a bridge, like just like in real life, that's like a place of weakness. And what does it mean for a consumer? And navigating that, it's tough because, yeah, it's unproven. And if you remove the myth, that all of the chains are telling you about like security, etc., you realize that under the hood, like everybody's playing, building the plane as they're flying it, like everybody. And that means risk for the consumer. And I think we're all in gaming, just to be clear, for a reason, is that we want to make game and we want to be creating fun for consumers, right? Like if we wanted to make really deep money, we would not be in gaming, we would be in finance and DeFi. But that means we love our players, and it fucking sucks when you know that, oh, you created a bug where it was not your game being down for an hour. People are pissed about your game being down for an hour or a couple of hours. Here it's like sometimes livelihood of people, and that carries like an added level of responsibility that everybody has to be very diligent about.
Yeah, no, I mean, I totally agree that that's those are the risk areas. I think across the industry, the negative part of where we are right now, and this is sort of the unfortunate side of innovation in general, is it attracts all sort of actors, and it's like there's a lot of euphoria, there's a lot of excitement. What comes with that also on the consumer side is there's a lot of feelings that get generated out of the speculative activity, and the financialization, which relates to the incentives, is the beauty of the new primitive that we have here. But it's also the dark side, and it's also created these the second order effects where if my neighbor bought this NFT for whatever, and then it's gone up 100x, and they made so much money, and they keep talking about it or whatever, and then I buy the NFT, and then I buy it on the way down though, and I lose all my money. Like I'm not going to be happy about that, and so I think that's what's created a lot of the negativity. I think that that's a huge challenge to overcome, and I think it's incumbent on all of the developers, not just game developers, but anyone that's working in this space to promote it in a positive way. It's just unfortunate. You just have different actors playing in, and everybody kind of feeding into that, and then you've got the hysteria of the media, acting as a negative microphone to that. So it's scary. I totally get it from a consumer standpoint. I think it's the job of the companies to make that easier. So, right. Hats off to someone, Nico, for instance, who's already building in the space and trying to build well and do well by consumers.
And I think we need to and it's going to happen. Like I'm being negative here, but because I'm very optimistic about the future, right? And I really believe in it. But when I see games that release their like first NFTs are like 2 ETH, I'm like, this is 99% of the population can't engage with your product. Like it's just no way. Like majority of the population, they spend like $0.99 every couple of days on your app because that, the world we live in right now with inflation, just the job market, it's tough, right? And I really believe we're going to see more inclusive Web3 space in the future. Right now, it's so driven by speculation that people sell at 1 ETH, 2 ETH, just ridiculous. And that's like gatekeeping fun. I think we're going to see more and more games where, it's play and earn, where you get an outfit and you can resell it, you can trade it, and then, you define the price, which that I'm very comfortable with. But developers also are going to create like better on-ramp of like, hey, buy an NFT for $5 and you get all of those things. It's not needed, but if you want that cool hat for your character, it's like $5. but now you can also own it and trade it. I think that's like super powerful, and I really look forward to that being our daily norm.
So Jeremy, that's really interesting, because I think it absolutely needs to happen, and in some respects it does happen, but I don't think it solves all the problems that we will see, because there's still this element of, like, take Dapper Labs for instance. It's not, it's collectibles for first and foremost, but there's game elements of there in what they've built and what they've launched. And early on, everybody was lining up to buy Top Shots. I remember the queues being $500,000, even upwards of $1 million in some cases, people lining up, because you knew that you spend $50 on a pack of cards, you could automatically sell that for like $1,000 or something like that. And that's just where the supply was relative to the market. They didn't I don't think deliberately create that scenario where people were speculating to that level, but it created an effect in the economy where that became an expectation, and then when they started bringing in on a lot more supply, that became a problem, and so that's kind of weighing negatively within the community there. So just making things more accessible doesn't stop the speculation.
Yeah. To be clear, I think the secondary market needs to regulate it itself. Like, if I want to sell you my used kind of like Hua for $1 million, I can try. You don't have to buy it, but I can try. I think that I have no problem with. It's really more at like the entry level. When you see some games where you're like, oh, the cheapest to even play the game is $500. I'm like, that's not sustainable.
I agree. I think that's going to change, right? And yes. I think that just like with any market, you're going to see things that are kind of stratified, right? You'll have the ones that are the 2 ETH, like super whale games, and that's fine. Let them play. Let them have 1,000 players or 100 players or whatever, and that's totally fine. Like, I don't have a problem with that. It's not very mass market, and the average person can't buy in. But yeah, I mean, that game can exist. And then you're going to have everything all the way down to the like, hey, this is a 0.00001 ETH thing, or it's even free, right? It's free to play. But then there's this economic component where you can potentially earn tokens, or you can win and earn. I think there's just going to be a lot more models than, like, I think people talk about Web3 gaming and it's like this monolith, right? And everybody has their own vision of it, but they all think it's the same vision, and it's not, right? There are so many versions of this that's going to be the reality in the future. You're going to have, just the same way that we have games exist on mobile phones and they exist on console and PC, and you can sideload them, and you have your trusted app stores and whatever. There's just a gazillion ways to access games and play games. Yeah, but I just think that there are going to be a lot of different versions of Web3 gaming in the future. There's just a lot of different business models and economy designs and what have you. And so I think we need to be careful about talking about Web3 as just like this one thing.
Right.
Agree.
100% agree. Yeah. Just look at the variety you have in games today. And like, right. Even with the advent of free to play, premium didn't get smaller. Right. It continued to grow, and people, continued to grow their demand for entertainment based products and stuff like that.
I think the big question then it becomes like access, how it's going to scale, right? And I think we all know the next big step is going to be access on mobile. Right now, the flow is extremely friction prone. It's not seamless. We all hear the rumbles that the large platforms are thinking about it, and of course they are. Like they would not pass on the opportunity of charging 30% of the sale. But until that happens, I feel like this is going to be a slow growth, just because it's on PC it's not where mass market consumers are interacting with gaming. We often talk about free to play grew because of access on your mobile phone.
Do you guys have thoughts on that in terms of when and if that happens?
I mean, my view is that I think, if we're talking about Apple and Google in particular here, I think it'll take them a while. I don't think they're going to get comfortable. Like, larger companies don't get comfortable with new technologies, especially ones that have like potential financial regulations, the SEC coming down on it. They're not going to, they need clarity. They need clarity before they do anything there. Now, maybe you can do like an NFT viewer, so you don't actually do the transaction on, the on-chain transaction. That might be okay and is okay. I think there's some use cases out there already that are just kind of like NFT galleries. But I think in terms of actually interacting, like on chain with any chain through a mobile app, I think that's still quite a ways away. That's my view. I think they just need a lot more legal clarity around, what is the regulatory environment for transacting with cryptocurrencies and or NFTs, period, before they can actually really go there.
Right. I thought maybe one other question I could ask, just kind of going back to Chris, some of the dynamics of the market that you kind of brought up, and some of the negativity, as well as, like, for example, Jeremy, you mentioned that you believe like a lot of the stuff in Web3 will likely fail, and certainly there's going to be some huge winners, but some of the stuff is going to fail. I personally feel like, unlike, back in the early free to play days, there was a lot of criticism, a lot of negative, like, external criticism on free to play developers. But today, when we see that with Web3 developers, I feel like there's a little bit more emotion, where people are getting really kind of emotional and upset by some of the criticism being levied against, whether it's Web3 or otherwise. And wondering if you guys had any thoughts about that. I don't know if this is controversial or not, but Nico, you actually working in this space, do you feel like, how do you feel when like, let's say Kotaku, has an article that's negative or things like that, or how are you kind of like feeling about some of this stuff?
So I personally feel fine about it.
Okay.
With anything new, you can expect backlash. We had the exact same backlash with free to play early on. We had the exact same backlash against social gaming. Zynga and Playdom and Playfish and EA. Like, I remember all of those extremely well, and there was always Kotaku every single time. So thank you, Kotaku, for being consistent at least. But no, it doesn't bother me because it's expected, and it actually, because we're building from the ground up. Like, we're not like so I think there's two angles here to talk about. One is developers like ourselves who are like, we're going kind of, crypto native, if you will. Like, we're going into the weeds and we're building from the ground up, in a way where we don't have kind of a legacy like thing to worry about, or legacy player base that we're like going to upset or anything like that. And so we're finding our customers where they are, right? We're finding them in their native environment, on Twitter, on Discord. We're building our community, 1 by 1, 10 by 10, 100 by 100, and we're meeting them where they are. And so they're not upset about, like, they're looking for something like this. They're excited about what we're doing, and so we actually have a very positive relationship with our player base, and the community that kind of we're encircled by. But there is another kind of developer, which is kind of your legacy developer, has an existing player base. We've seen it. I mean, Ubisoft came out with their announcement and they very quickly unannounced it. They were going to integrate NFTs into their games, and I think the backlash was huge. So we know the backlash is there. We know the kind of negativity is there. We expect it. But I do think, just like with free to play and just like with social games, it's the kind of thing that will like, okay, once the dust settles a little bit, things are going to be calmer. And I don't think that, I mean, it's very trendy right now to, dump on Web3, right? It's very trendy to dump on metaverse. It's also very trendy to say the word metaverse, right? So whenever that happens, like, both sides get their like moment in the spotlight, and get to kind of have the conversation, be the conversation starters. I think that'll settle down, and I don't think the backlash will be anywhere near what it is right this very second in time.
Chris or Jeremy, any thoughts?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I mean, I think Nico is totally on point. It's just where we are in the industry, and that'll change and develop over time. It's just the phases. It happens with all innovation as well. Like, we've seen these kind of cycles play out before as well, and any kind of change people are resistant to. Today, what's different is that the transfer of information is so fast, and everybody has a microphone, so you just hear all the voices, so it's just surfaced more. And so I think and that's why you also, like, to answer your question of the emotional part of it. I mean, I think the world is just, it feels more emotional because we hear a lot of about everything, right? And
Yeah.
the disagreements and stuff like that, and people can get very emotional about those things. So game developers aren't immune to that, and the game communities aren't immune to that. So it's more of the macro thing that's happening. It's nothing specific to this. What I do think where we have responsibility is, as the market grows and as people get, we can do a better job of being better stewards, and that goes across the whole community. There's bad actors here, and like, we need to do both on the platform side, they need to do a better job of kind of weeding out those, or not promoting those projects, and then we need to see the rise of projects that are working, and those ones get promoted, that set really good examples, and consumers then need to have good experiences in those cases to then engender trust. What's sad about what like the development so far is that you have this cloud of negativity that exists that now we have to then get over. I wish we didn't have to go through that, but it's sort of, it's sort of where we are. Yeah.
At the end of the day, like once you get good games that people are happy to play, that's where and we haven't got there yet, right? Like we're so early. Like there are firstly very few games out there, and then there are just whatever games are out there are not very good because it takes a while to create good games, and it creates a really long time to create good games on a brand new platform, and where you're figuring out like the technology piece and the economy piece. So game design has implications. So it took. I mean, the example I always use is how long we had the app stores now? 2009, right? So what are we talking? 13 years of mobile, basically, right? And for the longest time, everybody tried to build a first-person shooter on mobile and never succeeded. And I actually got to a point like 7 or 8 or 9 years in where I was like, I predicted that first-person shooters just will not succeed on mobile because you need the controller and the ability to like see the big screen and play on console and what have you. And then lo and behold, the platforms figured some stuff out on the technology side. Game designers got better and better after 10 or 100 iterations that failed. And next thing you know, you've got PUBG Mobile, you've got Call of Duty Mobile, you've got Apex Legends, you've got all these different games that suddenly exploded and figured things out. And that's the same cycle we're going to be in with Web3 and blockchain. It's going to take a while to figure some things out. But when they get figured out and you have really good games, people are just going to say, oh, these are really good games. And they're going to stop, dumping on Web3 and say, okay,
Right.
here's what good looks like. Here's where the bar is set. Because right now the bar is very low, and the quality is just not very good.
Right. And maybe we could dig into that a little bit more, Nika. And Chris, previously you had mentioned that there are kind of like some playbooks now that you can kind of dig into and kind of integrate into Web3. But when you guys think about the current Web3 integrations into games, and then to your point, Nico, about innovation, like how much innovation do you guys think is left in terms of new models, new ways of integrating Web3? And if you guys were to just kind of guess about specific areas of innovation or ways in which it could manifest in games, how would you guys think about that? I don't know. And since Jeremy,
Yeah.
you are the VP of innovation, do you want to start?
Sure. I mean, I think that's why we're all excited here is, we've been in free to play for over a decade. Not to say that it became boring, but at some point we were going through the motions, right? We were following the same recipe. Products could win, products could fail, but we were following somewhat of a guideline. And here it's, I don't know what I don't know. And that's very exciting. Like, what is the next model? Most of the current tokenomics right now are not working well. Is there a model that can work super well that adds value to developer and players? I hope so, but we're all trying to find it. Like, how can we build great, crypto games that are fun, that create value, that are sustainable, that generate revenue long term? That's super exciting. Yeah, I think when Chris talks about like there's a bit of a playbook, I think, not to put words in your mouth, but it's like we've seen things that work and we're all trying to replicate it. It's like, how do you build a great Web3 community? How does it differ from a Web2 community? Where are the channels that people can be acquired? Also, the UA landscape looks totally different because you can't promote a game on Twitter, a crypto game on Twitter, as an example. And so having to navigate those new constraints, limitation, also expectations of users. I think Nico was talking about like Ubisoft, failing with their quartz currency. It's like, well, you're not targeting the right player. What do the right player want, right? What's driving interest? What's driving hype? A lot of what we're working, and that's what I'm so pumped about. It's a lot of promise of a better future, right? But I can't tell you exactly what it looks like. I just think it's going to be great and exciting, and we're creating, a new space, and that's fucking awesome.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with. Oh, go ahead, Nico.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think one of the things you touched on there, Jeremy, which I think is super important for, I'm guessing the audience of this podcast is, game developers and kind of Web2 thinking about going to Web3. One of the things that we should know intuitively, but like until you actually go and try to do the things that you need to do to build a game and build an audience, you don't realize like how little of that stuff exists. Like we were so spoiled with mobile and free to play and console, whatever. You know what the channels are. You go to Facebook, you buy the mobile app install ads. You do this on Twitter, you do this on Google Play. Like you've got the analytics companies, you've got the ad monetization companies, you've got the picks and shovels. you have all the tools that you can use, this SDK, that SDK, that SDK. None of that stuff exists. Absolutely none of it exists. And so if you're a game developer, you got to go in and like, oh boy, like either we got to build it up ourselves or we got to fly a little bit blind, right? And flying blind is not fun for any game developer that's used to having all the analytics and all the data at their fingertips. And so that's one thing that's really, I think, underappreciated about, that the state, it's so nascent. Like there's no support structure. There's no analytics. There's nothing that you can plug in, play. And big companies are going to build on that, right? Of course, like it's always the same. It's like ad tech, analytics, and gaming, right? New platform.
100%.
Those are the three big boys.
Yeah,
so that'll come, but it's
data analytics for crypto right now. It's
rudimentary
is the nice way to put it. Compared to Sensor Tower, Data AI, everything that was available, the tracking system. Here you're like, I don't even know if those numbers are correct. I don't think they are. So,
Exactly. I mean, the numbers change on you all the time, because on-chain data obviously is public, right? You can analyze it, but like depending on like what wallet owns what and how people are transferring things between the others, and it's just an absolute nightmare. It's like a black box trying to figure out what the hell's going on. So
there's a ton of wash trading. Ton of wash trading. So
little difference. You said it's never fun for game developer to run blind. I'm fucking excited about it because it became so boring to do CTR tests on like, do people prefer this art style or this same art style but slightly different or this different? Like at some point it became so by the numbers, right? And because acquiring users is so expensive, it's so hard to scale a free-to-play mobile game, right? That everybody became risk averse. Like we did things so conservatively because that's the only way to like build something that you can scale. The shift to brand marketing, what a relief. Where it's like finally, rather than focusing on like day one numbers via Facebook ads, we're really trying to go to the community and like ask them like what excites you, like what resonates. That to me is like a breath of fresh air, to be honest.
And Chris, for our audience, could you explain what you mean by a wash trade? And then any thoughts on innovation as well?
Yeah, wash trading is just, the blockchain is public, but you can sell something to yourself. Everybody can have multiple wallets. And so a lot of fraud essentially happens by people doing that. And why would you want to do that? Well, you're kind of inflating the value of assets that you might own a lot of, or otherwise making it seem like they're valuable and making it appear to everybody else. So a lot of that happens in the marketplaces and in new marketplaces, especially when they're incentivized as well. So like a good example would be Looks Rare, which is a new marketplace that launched in February. Like I think 95% of the volume on there is whales kind of trading between themselves to collect the token incentives. But yeah, so like that happens. And what I meant when I said there's a playbook is there are bigger collections that have emerged, and I think they've actually moved at the right pace. They haven't built a full game necessarily. Some people have, but there are these bigger, like Bored Apes is a great example. Yuga Labs is a great example. Where what do they have? Well, they have a community of crypto whales that. Or people that got in early but now have become crypto whales because these assets are worth 100 ETH. They might have bought in at 1 ETH. They might have bought in at an expensive price, and they have this community of which they can then leverage and redirect. So an example of a play that you might build is like, why wouldn't you build a game for that community? That community has some revenue. It's not the biggest community. It doesn't create enough accessibility. I absolutely agree that we need things on the lower end as well. But that's also where some of these interoperability standards will start to emerge. Is you need a bigger player to come in, and I don't think the players that were really large in the prior era are going to be the leaders in this one. I think they're going to be a new set that think about it differently, and they may not have started out as game developers. I don't think any of them actually did, but so that's kind of what I mean by certain pillars of revenue have already been established. And you're starting to see that the bigger players are copying one another. Like Yuga is going to start to sell land. Well, who figured that out first? It was Sandbox, it was Decentraland, it was Somnium Space. Versus their starting point was assets, and then on the Axie side, well, they actually tried tokenomics and play to earn, and they innovated there. And so people are going to take those examples. So I don't think it's figured out by any means, but I think they're starting to emerge. And then what I'm very interested in is this interoperability. Is this the most interesting thing about the space is this the pace at which it innovates, and how everybody can build on top of one another. It's not perfect for sure. I think this composability can people can take that too far, but that is the ultimate goal here, and I think it leads to more. We don't have that as much in the traditional game industry. In the traditional game industry, everybody's closed off and on their own. We'll share advice between developers and stuff like that, but we can't actually build on what another developer has built. I can now take and build a game for with these apes, and they're going to launch these 3D models at some point. I can even build them myself, and award them to that base, and then I've got a revenue source of a community that I can latch onto. So I love the composability piece of it, and I think it leads to faster iterations. We're definitely seeing that as well.
Yeah, and Chris, I thought that was an interesting point you made. Like when I think about interoperability between games, my previous thinking before hearing what you talked about would be like, well, would there be an incentive for a new game to actually create that interoperability? But to your point, like if you're bringing in like the Bored Apes audience,
there's a revenue base there.
Exactly. Right. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that, but I thought that was very interesting.
And look, that's a very rich revenue base, right? Like all of those people have money to spend. They're crypto native, as Nico pointed out that he's targeting, and that is part of how we'll get there, right? It's not you're not going to. Unfortunately, we've created this negativity on the bottom end. It feels inaccessible. There's all these barriers. But what have we seen these collections do? Well, what they do in their subsequent drops is they double the quantity, they lower the price. So Apes, the Yuga has gone through 3 collections. They've got Apes first. It was super cheap, but you got in early and the floor prices skyrocketed because there's just way too much speculation and money in the space. People have been crypto rich, and there's no sinks in the whole industry, right? And so this was the first sink, so people bid them up. And then the second collection, which was Kennels, the dogs that they released, lower floor we saw. And then the third one, which was Mutants, and they put in some game mechanics, really simple game mechanics. If you're a game developer, you're like, oh my god, they did this and they made that much money, is like crazy. But it moved at the pace, I think, at where the industry is, and they supported the community, because who got rewarded in that instance? It's the people that bought and the people that bought in. And who is passionate about apes now? It's those people. So they've incentivized, and not to toot the horn of Yuga, I just think they've executed really well, but to incentivize that UGC that Nico was talking about as well. The innovation of apes was that it was a CCO license. So that means that the owner of the ape could monetize it, could capture the monetization and the licensing of that ape in other use cases. So we're starting to see dabbles of that happen. It hasn't really materialized in any meaningful way, but I think that's what allows for more innovation and more creators that then come to the table. And so I think they've built the right kind of framework to enable that. If you jump right to the end product, I don't think anyone has really executed that very well. Like no one's built this full game, but the stages I think are what's going to be required here. Because I tend to think as a traditional game developer is like, I want to build a game. I want to build to the end, right? That's what I'm used to doing. But I think in this world, it's more about paying attention to what's going on and building more primitives that then other people can use, or leveraging existing primitives and trying to build other layers. It's a bit more incrementalist.
To continue on interoperability, I think what a lot of people see, including myself, is Web3 is going to be the starting point for the next big franchises because of interoperability, right? Today, if I have 3 games, even if they're in the same world, let's say League of Legends, right? They've got multiple games now in a TV show. There's no real connection between those games. They are separate, isolated experiences. And with interoperability, I can build a real world where if you have this character in this first game, that character can be in the second game, in the third game. And as Chris said, I do a partnership with Chris, and now the character from my game is also in Chris's game. And if you own it one time, the usage and the value just keeps on expanding, right? And that's what's going to create communities that retain and build big brands. I imagine Riot is thinking about it, but imagine League of Legends if their characters were available in multiple formats, in multiple experiences. suddenly Riot, big already, just doubles in like reach and size, right? Because the proposal is just massive. And in this like post-IDFA world where we're all struggling to cross-promote effectively and acquire users, like this is also a channel for cross-promotion and acquisition. Like it's not interoperability just for the sake of fun. It's also for the sake of like keeping users entertained.
Yeah, and I think that's the way that we may want to think about the interoperability issue. Is it's a form of user acquisition, right? Like with IDFA deprecation, Apple killed value optimization, but if you can bring a bunch of people who own apes, that's your new VO targeting. But
absolutely. And to be clear, one thing I've heard often is like, oh, but if you can't take the model as it is if it's a different game with an art style. There's something called meta wrapping that a lot of people are starting to do, where you're going to have 3 different visuals for one asset. So their sword is going to be, cell shaded in one, it's going to be realistic in the second one, and then it's going to be voxel style in the third one. And that's all under the same hash. So, we have this concept of like NFTs, one image, or it's one thing. Well, actually, no, that thing can be multiple things within the same component. And so suddenly when you realize that, you're like, shit, yeah, I can have that sword in like 3 different styles in 3 different games, in more than 3 games if I want to. And that just like unlocks a ton of potentiality.
Right. I mean, I think the simple way the consumer looks at this is like, how many times do I have to go create an avatar, right? Like I want one avatar, and maybe I want 2 avatars. Maybe I have multiple, I have 2 different online personalities or whatever, but I want to create 2 avatars, and those are my avatars. I don't want to have to recreate my avatars in all these other games.
Right. And maybe another topic we could talk about for some of the traditional game developers thinking about jumping into Web3 opportunities in terms of the investment environment. I know, Nico, you guys raised a Series A from Makers, I believe, but like maybe
yeah, they led the round.
Could you speak to your thoughts in terms of the current investment environment for Web3 opportunities? And it seems like you guys like have a great profile in terms of like the type of companies that investors are looking for, but in terms of like the current investment environment, and what do you think are the kinds of teams or opportunities that investors are going to be looking to invest into?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, it's evolving all the time. It was super hot last year, October, November. Cooled off a little bit now, but obviously there's a huge number of very, very large, crypto-focused or, even Web3 gaming-focused funds out there with literally billions and billions to deploy. And so I don't see a slowdown in kind of the funding environment. I do think that investors are going to be more picky about the teams that they invest in, because I think that Jeremy and Chris and myself, and I think all of us actually agree that the vast majority of most projects, whether they be gaming projects or just NFT projects that have aspirations of adding gamification or whatever, there's a lot of that going on as well. They're going to fail, right? Like they're not. It's making games is hard, and there are a lot of and I use this term endearingly. There are a lot of crypto bros who got rich with crypto who think they can make games. And it's really not that easy, as we all know. And so I think a lot of what's going on right now is going to be reflected in the investors' pickiness as well. I don't think a lot of those projects are going to get funded that are like founded by crypto bros who say, here's an idea for a game. Like, we're going to go in a raid. Like, that's literally what a lot of these things are. Like, hey, we've got an NFT. We're going to go raid. We're going to earn some token, and then we're going to come back. It's basically staking, but gamified staking. So I don't think a lot of those projects are necessarily going to get funded. I do think that we are seeing already some really, really great, game designers, game makers who've had previous success, who are, big thinkers who are coming into the space. You got Peter Moore building on, Gala Games. They're making a kind of a business management simulation game. I forget his name now. We could probably add it to the show notes afterwards. But a pretty heavy hitter from, I think, X-Kabam joined FTX as their head of games. I may be getting the company wrong as well, but there's there you go. Thank you for that. But yeah, I think as you see more and more talent, so this is the interesting thing. So I was working in voice games previously, and you didn't see that big migration of talent from the kind of traditional industry into voice gaming, and that kind of reflected the fact that like the market wasn't necessarily as big as initially people had thought. You did see a lot of talent migration from traditional gaming to free to play, And that is reflected in the quality of the games that are kind of being produced. So as you see the talent migration, and that's one of the signs that tells me like Web3 is going to make it, right? Like Web3 gaming is going to be a thing. How big, TBD, but it's going to be a real category of gaming in the not too distant future, is the talent migration, right? And those are the teams that are going to get the funding. And it's going to be a mix of like crypto-focused investors, gaming investors who are dabbling in Web3, and then just, traditional VCs who are looking at kind of opportunities in entertainment and content. But for all the talk about Web3 and, blockchain and what it enables, which is very, very exciting, at the end of the day, it's content, right? It's about producing great content that people want to engage with. Like that's what we got to remember, right? And it's got to come out of your entertainment budget. It's not going to come out of your investment budget, right? It's not going to come out of your, like, for the average player at least, it's not going to come out of your, like, okay, I'm going to put this in my 401k, or I'm going to buy this NFT in this game. Like, no, that's not the choice people are making. It will be coming out of entertainment budget, and that's finite, right? Like it's shared with Netflix and mobile gaming and whatever. So long answer there, but I do think that the investment is there. It's going to be there for the best teams, but it's going to reward those who know how to make games ultimately. So
money is still widely available right now, but it's true that the quality bar has heightened.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, what I've been hearing from some of the investors that I speak to is that they're still getting a lot of pitches still, like even from last year to this year, still like half of the pitches are crypto, Web3, blockchain related. But still seems like there's a lot of interest and activity there. Even with my own company, when we were fundraising, we had a number of kind of offers to, like, if you guys fully pivot over to crypto, then there'd be more interest or things of that nature. But I think the one other interesting thing that I thought from an investment perspective was interesting is just the valuations of crypto companies. And I think there's actually like a little bit of a resentment from the free-to-play guys around, why are the crypto companies getting such high valuations? But investor did explain to me, well, the reasons why that exists is because, a lot of the risk is mitigated from the initial token sales that are possible when you do invest into a crypto-based company. But I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on that aspect of it as well.
Isn't that ironic when free-to-play companies were like raising an insane valuation 10 years ago? This is the new phase. Like, I'm sad to say, but you have to get on board because this is what the growth is, right?
Yeah. Okay. Maybe another question. This could be really quick. We mentioned like a number of companies that are doing interesting things in Web3. If you guys were to mention some specific companies that our audience should look out for, who are some of those companies? What are some of the initiatives that they should be aware of?
I can start. I'm very focused on Solana, so I'm really, like in the weeds there, and trying to, support fellow game devs wherever I can. The ones that I have a lot of respect for. So there's Mini Nations is a game that's it's a first-person shooter in the browser, and they actually started outside of crypto. They didn't have any blockchain integration, but they're definitely kind of leading the charge. A guy called Alex Paley is the founder there. I think they raised a $30 million Series A just recently. They have 2 million registered users. Really fun game. It's a simple, browser-based first-person shooter. They're integrating NFTs as essentially skins, right? So it's a very simple, very clean integration, and it's exactly what we talked about, which is like, hey, I'm a decorator. I want to just wear this cool helmet. I'm going to spend, and their NFTs are relatively cheap, so I respect them for that. There's another company called Third Time Entertainment, I think they're called, Third Time Games. A guy called Ian Cummings, founder and CEO there. They just raised a seed round. They're experienced free-to-play game devs. They had a very popular horse racing game, not Zed Run. This is not Zed Run, but they're basically kind of taking what they learned from their couple of million players on the free-to-play horse racing game and integrating that into kind of with a blockchain mechanic, tokenomics, and they had I thought it was fun. I really enjoyed it. They had 2 collections. They called it Stylish Studs and Fine Fillies. And you would buy a stylish stud, and it would have a perfect pairing with one of the fine fillies. And then you would breed your racehorse. And that's the racehorse is the one you would then use in the actual game itself. So I thought it was fun. I thought it was delightful. They did it well. It wasn't a cash grab at all. It was just a very clean and fun way of kind of teaching players how to like, oh, these are NFTs, but you can actually have utility out of them. And look, out of the end, comes a merge mechanic, which is your racehorse for the game. So I really like what they're doing as well. So I'll leave it with those two. Those are the two ones that are kind of I look at and say, hey, I like what they're doing. They're moving fast. They're trying different things out. That's the other thing. Like, you don't have to love the merge mechanic or the breeding mechanic, but they're trying things out, and it's like just interesting to see what folks are doing. And I think the key in my mind is anybody who wants to succeed in this space has to move quickly, right? You have to iterate fast, because if you're going to build a AAA game and you say, hey, 3 years from now, I'm going to put it no, I mean, 3 years from now, that blockchain might not exist, right? Or the technologies are completely outdated. So I do think that we're at that kind of very rapid iteration phase of trying different things out. And I think Chris was making this point, which is like, hey, you're going to take a little bit of this, like you're going to take the Axie Infinity tokenomics, and you're going to take the Bored Apes brand marketing piece, and you're going to take something from here, and just kind of different, you're going to see, I think, can be an explosion of creativity, which is typically what you see kind of at that early stage of a new platform emerging. We saw the same thing with free-to-play mobile. Like, there was just a crazy amount of experimentation. A lot of it didn't work, but a lot of the pieces of, the things that were actually interesting made it into other titles, which then ultimately became, things like Clash of Clans, which has been around now for God knows how many years, right? So, yeah, those are my thoughts on kind of the types of game companies that I think will succeed, and just two specific ones that I'm happy to mention and plug here.
Chris, who else should we know about besides Yuga Labs?
I mean, to be honest, I haven't I know there's a lot of games out there that have sort of come more from the traditional game industry. I'm actually more fascinated with because the interesting thing about NFTs is it's included a lot of other industries. It's got a lot of culture interested, and so I think the opportunity for brand engagements and things like that is widened. There was a company that I started following pretty early into like the beginning of 2021 called Artifact. It's spelled without any of the vowels, Artifact. And they launched a collection called CloneX, which was very, very exciting. Before that, they were just really great digital artists that created great 3D work. And so off of that ability, they were able to launch, some great collaborations and great artists. They brought in, they did collaborations with artists and fashion icons and things like that. And they eventually got bought by Nike at the tail end of last year for about $200 million. And I think even under Nike, just the show of sort of excitement from some of these luxury brands as well in this space is very reassuring. So I'm quite bullish on them. They're quite bigger, so they're not like a small game studio, but yeah.
Jeremy?
Gala Games. I'm just fascinated. They don't have that many games that are really live, but when it comes to the marketing playbook, I mean, they're killing it. Like, they're so good at just marketing, promoting, and also being extremely aggressive when it comes to signing up developers, right? I mean, they're taking a land grab approach to be a centralized Web3 destination. I mean, yeah, they're great. They're really, really great.
Yeah. I would have to agree, actually. Eric Schiermeyer is the founder there, and he's ex-Zynga co-founder as well, and actually an investor in our company too. He's very, very smart. He wrote the product manager playbook at Zynga, and he is also very aggressive, and he is doing an incredible job, Jeremy. I have to echo that of actually just really pioneering so many things, right? The pre-sales, the signing up of developers, the store that they have, the gala,
the music, the celebrities,
the music deal with Snoop Dogg. Like, it's incredible, absolutely fantastic. So yes, absolutely, huge shout out to Eric and team over there for what they're doing, for sure.
All right. And I know we're running a little long, guys, so maybe I could squeeze in one last question before we wrap up, but just wanted to circle back to community. I did notice that in terms of like a lot of the Web3 guys, maybe similar to some of the PCHD guys, but less so on the free-to-play side. Like, in terms of community, there seems to be a huge focus on Discord, but like, Nico, in terms of how traditional game developers, or maybe even free-to-play guys like myself who rarely use Discord, how should we be thinking about community? What are your thoughts in terms of developing community for a Web3 game?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I could go on for hours, and I'll try to be as concise as I can, because this is just a really interesting topic that is very open-ended. But building community in my mind is very different, as I mentioned earlier, on the show here. You got to meet your customer where they are. And our view, yes, we absolutely need to grow the player base to include non-crypto natives. But our belief, especially having been in the space now for, the better part of 9 months, almost a year now, is that you got to start with the crypto natives, and then you've got to get the crypto natives to become evangelists to bring in their friends, because the game is fun, right? That's in our mind the approach that we're taking. So the building of community basically happens, and I also mentioned that there is no UA whatsoever. There's no targeting, no nothing, and so it happens on Twitter mostly. You start on Twitter. You start to establish yourself as kind of like a a thought leader, if you will, or at least a game that's doing interesting things. You start following the account. I mean, it's just Twitter 101 basically, and you start to kind of get yourself out there. That is then your top of funnel into Discord, which is where the community starts to gel, and you've got to be active in there the whole time. But yeah, those are the two main tools that we're using. I think you'll find most other developers will probably say something similar. There may be some variants, to that. But yeah, you start with Twitter, top of funnel, bring those folks into Discord, convert them into active community members. You gamify the Discord experience. Like, it's actually amazing. You got to look at all the different projects and see what they're doing. And there's just a really incredible, again, a Cambrian explosion of community activities that are just really fascinating to follow. So you take what works for you and works for your community, and kind of borrow from different initiatives that you're seeing elsewhere. And that's ultimately you got to have the fun game, of course, but that's how we've approached community building, and have created something where, we're very proud of the fact that we have a very active Discord. Folks are building third-party tools, which is always a great sign, to analyze their block stars and their stats and their collections, to find out which block stars match well with others in the band for the chemistry and all that good stuff. So we have at least 5 different projects internally, like within the community going, that are just doing different things. So yeah, keep the community engaged, give them what they want, right? Like, it's not about like, it's actually really humbling, because you don't really set the tone, the community does. Obviously you need to moderate, you make sure it doesn't get out of hand, but if you've got the right people, the right place, like, the community actually tells you what they want to do, and then you are following in many ways what they're asking for.
Yeah, man, I think just to draw on that, like, it's a really good example, because how did, the older generation that didn't know how to use mobile phones get on mobile phones and use WhatsApp or WeChat and all these? How did their parents get it, oriented with all these things? It's like we brought them in, we set up their phones for them, and we showed them how to use it in a lot of cases, right? And so I think the same thing happens in the Web3 case. You've got these digital natives now, or crypto natives, that will shepherd other people, and that's how you engender trust and get over some of the challenges that you see in the headlines and some of the misnomers that exist there. That's also what's also created some of the challenges that exist today too, though. But I'm pretty optimistic that we will get there eventually.
One last comment, which is, yes, Twitter is very important, but it's becoming also very expensive, because it's not just about organic communication, right? It's like, you need to work with really talented influencers or KOLs, because they have thought leadership in this space, and a lot of people follow their advice. And those KOLs have learned that they can monetize their voice. And so it is a new way of thinking about user acquisition. To be perfectly honest, you're spending in order to acquire consumers. And 2 is don't diminish the importance of press in that space, right? Which I would not have said in free to play, but strong articles on TechCrunch or Cointelegraph or CoinDesk, they do have a very significant impact. When we were growing the Champions community at Gem City, we were surprisingly positively shocked by the impact of a couple of good press releases. Like, just that, suddenly our community grew by like 20, 30K a day. It was crazy.
And Jeremy, KOL meaning key opinion leader, is that right?
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly.
Got it. All right, guys. Well, I think we basically made it. Thank you so much for your time. I thought maybe just to wrap up, maybe if each of you could, if you have a final message for our audience, or any message you want to get out there in terms of your opportunities, jobs, things like that. And also maybe ending with, if you have a specific future trend or prediction for Web3 and gaming, and maybe starting with you, Jeremy.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hiring in all roles you can imagine. You can find me on LinkedIn. Would love to just work with people that are passionate about gaming and the future of gaming and what that entails, because it's just such a broad topic. And my prediction is, I look forward to Apple and Google entering the fray and allowing players to interact with crypto on their mobile device. That's my growl.
I heard a rumor that some of the JDs included something specific about crypto. So I think the stores might actually be actively investigating this issue. Chris?
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm just excited for, I think to the developers out there, stay optimistic and keep innovating, right? Like there's always a lot of challenges. There's always a lot of these problems, but that's also where the opportunity comes from. And I'm excited for the innovation. I think just on the Apple note, I mean, I saw a headline the other day of them supporting MetaMask with Apple Pay. So I think there's certain signs that are warming up, and I think there's just will become an overwhelming amount of demand at some point. But I don't think that NFTs or Web3 is in any means mainstream yet. So it's still very, very early days.
All right, Nico?
Yeah, we're also hiring, and you can very easily find me on LinkedIn. I've got a pretty unique name, and check us out. At Blockstars Game is our Twitter handle, and you can follow us there, and also find us. Blockstars.gg is our website. So if you're curious and interested, you can kind of go check that out. And in terms of a prediction, I actually don't have a prediction. Having been in this space now for 9 months, what I've learned is that it's very hard to predict anything even a week out, never mind a month or a year or 3 years out. So what we're trying to do is just to stay humble and keep learning and keep iterating and just keep building and see what happens. But no big predictions, no metaverse predictions, no technology integration with Apple or Google predictions. Yeah, I've just learned to kind of we just don't know. There's so many unknowns. We're so early. We're so early, as they say.
Okay. All right, gentlemen. Again, thank you so much. I personally learned a lot. And for our audience, we'll catch you next time. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you
so much.